Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Bulletproof from 1996. So, this is to just be another one of those kind of buddy cop kind of things. Like, of course, reminding us of like 48 Hours, or like Dwayne The Rock Johnson film, The Rundown, or for me, it would just kind of go on and remind me of like those comedy cop movies, like the Running Scared with Billy Crystal and Gregory Hines, or the Rob Schneider Jean Claude film Knockoff, which is really fun. That I think is to always be my favorite Rob Schneider. Well, it's my favorite Jean Claude film that I like the most. Like there could be like another favorite Rob Schneider film, but anyways, we go on in this film and have where Damon Wayans is actually playing more of the straight guy, and Adam is to kind of play the goofball. And it's just the title. It's not like he's like, yeah, I have to be goofy all the time. No, it's just he's playing the more joking character. But so we come to have Keats, who is to be this undercover guy, and so Damon Wayans is playing Keats, and he's actually Jack Carter. And so we come to find that Keats is to be working with Moses. He's been working with him supposedly for one whole year exactly. And so Moses, it seems, is going to let Keats on this operation that is to be handled by James Caan, who is actually Colton in this film. And like James Caan is playing a very like stereotypical like I'm wearing a cowboy hat, and like I'm going to tell you about the American dream, and that you should have two cars in your driveway, and this and that, and like we have this like kind of commercial where he is to be this car salesman, but I'm also like, okay, how does the car salesman part like connect with what they're kind of doing? Like I guess it just has to tell us that Colton is just this rich guy. But anyways, the kind of the sidekick that Colton has in this movie is actually a guy named Bledsoe. And if you guys don't remember, of course, Batman and Robin, he's actually the guy that plays Bane in the Batman and Robin movie. And I kind of knew that beforehand, like this was that guy. And then when I saw this movie, I was like, oh yeah, that's the Bane guy. And because I remember like reviewing Batman and Robin a long time ago, and then when I went into this, I'm like, yeah, I can really tell like that this guy is to be the Bane guy from simply how he moves in this film. And it looked very similar to how he was to move when he was to be Bane, and so on and so forth. Anyways, so pretty decent cast, and also can kind of tell you that there, of course, are to be some actors that are to go on and consistently be in Adam Sandler's movies, like Alan Covert, which, of course, you would see him in almost every Adam Sandler film you've ever seen in your life. But anyways, yeah, if I didn't state already, because I want to make sure I state it, the shower scene in this movie is freaking hilarious. No matter how many times I can go on and see this movie, because I've seen this movie more than once. I saw it like a long time ago on TV randomly somewhere when it was that time of things. And so, yeah, so with that said, like there's also like Monica Potter, who a lot of people probably know more from the very first Saw movie, or she was in like Kiss the Girls, I believe. Some movie with Morgan Freeman. And I was like, oh my god, like she plays this really small role as this like biker woman, and like Adam Sandler has to go on and see this like biker guy that's big and huge, and Adam goes on, I'm like, well, yeah, I was hitting on your woman. because he figures that Keith is going to come in and save him, and of course he does, but still. Anyways, yeah, so we have these two characters that end up, like, this whole bus thing that they were trying to do, like, goes bad. We have Keaton that ends up getting shot in the process, and when he, like, rehabilitates and comes back onto the force, he is to realize that he needs to go on and uh, take care of Moses and go on and like transfer him, because Moses is to squeal on Colton every bit of all the information that he knows. So Moses is going to roll on him, and so here's where all the adventure goes into, with Colton trying to go on and find Moses and trying to kill him, and we have this kind of road trip of a film that eventually goes on and takes place. The whole entire time, we of course have Moses, who is to try to figure out if any of these agents are to go on and be in Colton's pocket, because it's like, hey, like, this Gentry guy, like, or this person or that person, it's like, I don't think you can trust them, because like, I know that like, they're working for Colton or something like that. So we have a whole thing of that in this film. Other than that, I think I'm just going to go on and just head into spoilers. I think it's about that time to just double five this bad boy up, because I think it's about that time again. What would be the grading of this movie? Where can you go on and see this movie? Right now, it's currently available on Amazon for absolutely free. I would go on and tell you that there is an app that I've been using for a very long time called Zelliphonic. Zelivonic. You can go on and see a lot of stuff for absolutely free. Stuff that you would have to, like, forcibly go into premium accesses or this and that, whatever would have you. Strenuous ways that you would have to say that you could see something. You can go onto this app and see for free, as long as you have a Google Play Store. You can be able to see this app, download it, and whichever, hopefully. Unless it's not available in your country or whatever goofy thing. But anyways, let's go on and grading of this film. I wish this movie was longer than, like, it's like an hour and 20 minutes. Like, I feel like we don't get enough of anywhere with this film because of the runtime. There's some good jokes in here, but it's just, like, it's not quite good enough. I would really have to go on and say that Bulletproof is a okay movie. It's an okay kind of movie that can, like, really not have you be kind of looking of how long this movie has been. It's a fun adventure. It reminds me of all those kind of comedy films that, of course, you've seen that ends up being like a buddy cop thing and whatever have you. Even kind of reminds me a little bit of the Beverly Hills Cop, for how it all, like, kind of ends up getting kind of put together in a way. But anyways, let's go on and let's just double fire this bad boy up. I think it's about the time to just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time I'm going to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of it, we have both Keats and Moses who are trying to go on and steal this car. And so Moses is just talking about how this is like a $100,000 car, and Adam's like, or Moses is like, why would anybody go on and buy a $100,000 car, or 100,000 or whatever, 100K car or whatever? Like, that's just like begging for someone to go on and steal it. So we have, of course, Keats, who is trying to hotwire this car, and it seems that all of a sudden, like, an alarm goes off of some sort of this car, and they're like, oh crap. So we have a guy that goes on and is to be running out of his house with this gun to fire upon these men, And so we have both Keats and Moses who are to like figure out a way to get this car started. They get out of there, and so all while also like the guy who's in the house is watching the commercial of Colton, and he's talking about the American dream is and having two cars in your driveway and anyways, because he's like he goes on and on about like the American way or the American dream and all that jazz. So Keats and Moses go on to be driving crazily through these streets to alert one of these cop cars. So we have Keats and we have Moses that are driving on, and like we have Moses who's kind of delivering these funny lines about like, well, hey man, like don't kill me. I have a lot of crap to do tomorrow, and so on and so forth. So they're driving along, and so we have at some point where Keats is to go on and lose the cop car, and so they end up kind of parking off to the side, and we have Keats who is to see that there's like a police officer uh, over next to them, and so Keats is to go on and ask this police officer, it's like, well, hey, like, can you give me directions to Disneyland? Because my friend here, he's kind of special, or he's kind of this and that. Like he wants to go to Disneyland, and like say the word Disneyland to him. He's like Disneyland, and so we have Keats who just starts laughing and like, man, I like the way he says Disneyland. So Keats asks for directions of where to go to Disneyland, even writes directions to it. And so the next thing we see is that both Keats and Moses are at this bar, and Keats is like touting about how like they got away from these cops, even to the point of like Keats is asking directions to go to Disneyland because they were so in the clear. So we have Moses and Keats, and so Moses, it seems, is to have like a lot of money from the gig that they did, and so Keats is telling Moses, like, well, hey man, like, why is it that you always have a heavier stack of money when we do these jobs? And Moses is like, well, hey man, like, you know that we split everything like 50-50. And Keats is like, well, yeah, but you always have a bigger half. So that is probably giving Moses even more motivation to want Keats to go on and meet up with Colton, like their big their big job. So we have Moses that is to go on and see this woman over by this bar, and so he sits next to her, and he's telling her, it's like, well, hey, like, it seems that my friend there was telling me that you wanted me to come over here, and the girl's like, no, I don't think I did, and so Moses is like, well, yeah, I think he was telling me that, and so I really believe him, and so we all of a sudden have this big muscular biker guy that is to be like, hey man, you're hitting on my woman kind of thing. And so Moses is to go on and just be like, hey man, no, I was and so we have Moses that realizes like Keats is coming in, and then Moses changes his tune to like, yeah, I was hitting on her. I was like, really just batting it out. I was like, yeah. So because Moses naturally assumes that Keaton has his back. So, or Keats has his back. I said Keaton, my bad. So, Moses goes on to then realize that Keats is like, no man, hey, like this is all on you. And so, to finally have like kind of Moses learn a thing or two, but Keats eventually defends his friend after, Moses kind of takes some lickings here. So We then go on to, I think the biker guy ends up getting like hit in the nuts or something, or kicked in the nuts, and so he falls over, and so the biker girl like jumps on top of the biker guy. It's like, oh, how is your nuts? I don't think it's all that great now that you just jumped on the guy. So we have both Keats and Moses, like, they mosey on to have Moses talk to Keats about like their bigger job that they're gonna do, and Keats is gonna go on and meet with Colton before they go on and do this big deal. So, and Keats is like, okay, great. So Keats goes on and leaves, and he gets arrested by these two officers, Detective Solomon and Detective Jones. I believe that's who they both are, because one of the pictures is not actually there. Because why would it? They go on and arrest Keats, and like I don't think they even state like what the actual charge really was. But so they arrest him, they book him Dano, and they bring him in. And so this is only for Keats to go on and him to talk to his captain, Captain Jensen. And so Keats is kind of letting his captain know, like, hey, I'm going to go on and meet with Colton, like big fish. And so we have Captain Jensen that's like, oh, okay, well, I think you should probably wear a wire. And Jensen's like, I don't know about that. Like, I don't think it's going to work out. So we have, of course, Keats, who is going on and kind of reflecting on something that Moses had said about Disneyland. And so the captain's like, wait a minute, like, you starting to get a little soft on this guy? Are you starting to get a little soft on this criminal? And Keats is like, no, man, like, no, but it was just funny that he just said that. And he's like, and Keats, I think, wants to go on and at some point, like, help Moses. And he's like, no, you are softening the guy. And Keats is like, well, maybe I am. Shut up. So we have Keats that goes on the very next day. And so he meets up with Colton and he doesn't have a wire on him. And it's lucky because we, of course, have when Colton meets Keats, he's like, well, yeah, like, I know Moses. Like, I can trust Moses. You, I don't trust. So they go on and they search him, and we would, of course, find that Keats doesn't have a wire. So good on that. So it's like, okay, I think I can go on and I think I can trust you. But we just have everybody that just does not trust Keats for whatever goofy reason. So, but they still go along with this. So Keats and Moses goes on to make their way to this drop point, this place where we have all this stuff going on for all these guys who have all these guns and so on and so forth. So now we of course have Keats who is wired now, so that way they can kind of pull this sting, and they're waiting for Colton also. So we have them go in, both Keats and Moses, and so they meet up with a kind of cartel guy, and or a guy, of course, who is to be a person that is obviously not an IMDb, because heaven forbid I can find him anywhere, right? Moving on. So we go on to have this guy who's working for Colton, let's just say to be creative here, and we have at some points where Keats is asking Moses, like, well, hey, like, is Colton gonna be here? And Moses is like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, he always kind of makes it at, like, the tail end of everything. And we also come to find out later that Colton had, like, a flat tire, and that's why they were so late. So, Keats is just kind of looking around, and he's kind of getting a little, like, a little agitated. You can kind of see, like, like, he's getting a little worried. So, Colton's man goes on to like spot Keats and is just like, well, you know what? Like, I don't like how you're being so shifty and like the questions you're asking. And so Moses is like, hey man, like he's not a cop. So we have Moses that goes on and zips down Keats's jacket to then showcase the wire. And then Colton's guy is like, oh my god. So Keats is like, oh, and so like Captain Jensen's like, hey, let's go in. Like, we obviously had Keats, like his cover is blown, so let's get in here. So they're trying to arrest everybody. We go on to have Keats, who is now chasing after Moses, and so what ends up happening is we have Moses, who's to go on and have this gun, and and Keats is chasing after him. So we have at one point where Moses to have this gun, and he has this thing kind of coming from behind him, and this is to be some kind of like pulley system like thing. But if anyways, like when Moses is not paying attention to the thing that's like behind him, he ends up getting hit with this thing in the back, and the gun like fires from out of Moses' hand by mistake, and Keats ends up getting shot in the head. You would think he would be dead at this point, but we would just come to find out that Keats will be fine because of course he is guy that is to be on the poster of the film. So Keats goes on to after getting shot, being rushed to the hospital, and goes through all this rehab, and even is to meet a girl named Tracy, who he falls in love with. Yada yada yada. So we have, of course, Moses, who runs away from this place and bumps right into Colton. And we would have Moses, who had gone on and stated Colton before that if Keats is a cop, that Moses will suck off Colton. And so, since we find out now that Keats is to be this cop, Colton reminds Moses, like, "What did you tell me before? That you would suck me off if Keats was a cop?" And Bledsoe is going on and telling Moses like they were late because of a flat tire and so on and so forth. So Colton is tempted to go on and want Moses dead and want I think Bledsoe to do it. So Moses is able to kind of get out of this and run away and run off. And so he luckily gets out of this. So we end up having Moses, who now goes on to be on the side of the road randomly somewhere. And we have these two cop cars that are going on to have Moses with this dog, because we have at one point where Moses is to have like met this dog, and like there's this weird goofy connection between the two of them. But so we have Moses that is to be like having like a huge amount of alcohol in the back seat of his car, like there's huge amount of bottles just there. And so like, well, hey sir, like have you been drinking? And Moses is like, well, no, but like the dog had a lot. And so Moses goes on and he's talking about going to Mexico to be a bullfighter. So when they go on and tell him like, hey man, like can you go on and get out of the car and just walk a straight line? And Moses is like, well, sure. Immediately when he tries to get out of the car, he flops right down onto the ground immediately. And so they go on and they arrest him, and they find out that that Moses will actually be a part of that whole like he's been wanted for crimes. So we have Keats that goes on to, after his rehab, making his way back to the department. Everybody's going on of like, man, like this guy's unstoppable. Even a bullet to the head won't do it. So like they're talking about how great this guy is and like how scary he is and so on and so forth. So when Keaton makes it back, we go on to have Captain Jensen, who is talking to Keats, and is telling him like, well, hey man, like we had just booked Moses, and so he's gonna immediately roll on Colton to try to minimize his sentence. So it seems that Moses is to have made a request that he wants Keaton or Keats or Carter here in this case to go on and kind of bring him in, or kind of bring him to where he's going to go next to squeal on Colton. And so Keats doesn't want to go on and have anything to do with Moses. And so like, well, hey man, are you just afraid of him? And Keats goes on, and the guy who says this to him, Finch, we have Keats that grabs him. It's like, well, no, like I think I'm gonna kill him the next time I'm gonna see him. So like that's hence why like he's just avoiding all this. And so we get to the point where like when both Keats and Moses are just kind of walking to this plane, we have Keats is like, well, hey, like you better not sneeze, you better not fart, or I will shoot you. And so we have Moses is like, well, what if I chew really loud? You're going to shoot me then? And Keats is like, yes, I'll shoot you if you chew too loud. But moving on. So, we have Keats that goes on and is to find Moses kind of waiting at this airplane hangar to go on this plane to get ready to go. So, we have Moses who is not like handcuffed, and he's with this dog, and he's having him play dead, and he's like bang, and he falls. So Keats is telling the guys like, well, hey, like why isn't this man cuffed? And so it's like, well, it's just one guy and it's a bunch of us, like we didn't think it was a big deal. So it's like, no, like cuff him, hands, legs, everything, like cuff him to hills. So Keats and Moses are now like walking to this plane, and so that's when we get like the whole like, what if I chew really loud kind of thing. So we all of a sudden start to see that certain police officers that are kind of behind them are getting killed, or getting clapped, I guess would be the word. They're getting murdered. So we come to find out that there is a sniper somewhere, so they're running to the plane. They're like, hey guys, let's get to the plane. So we come to find out that when Keats and Moses are to get to this plane, we have these guys that are coming after them, these motorcycle helmet guys, and shooting and whatever. So we come to find out that one of the bad guys is to shoot the pilot. And so this plane is technically kind of rolling. And so, like, who are we going to get to fly the plane? And Moses is like, well, hey, man, I have 1,000 hours. And Keats like, what are you talking about? It's like, hey, man, I have 1,000 hours. I can fly this plane. So Keats and Moses, we go on to have Moses, like, kind of pull up on this plane But before he does, he's like, well, hey man, like you gotta apologize for what you did to me, because it's an awful thing of what you did. And we kind of get a lot of that in the movie where Moses is like, man, like you must be like a horrible human being to have gone and done that to me, and this and that. And oh, we also had the one scene where Keats was debating whether or not to go on and do this. And we of course would have Tracy who's convincing Keats to go on and do it and telling him that like 8 hours a day he goes on and he's miserable because he hates his job. And Keats is also to hate the fact that he didn't kind of resolve Moses's cases, and that's making him miserable 24 hours a day. And so, like, that whole Moses situation wasn't what he wanted out of it. So, Keats is to go on and look at Tracy and just be like, okay, I'll do the case because you convinced me to. So, Keats, Moses, we come to find out they are to try to get the plane in the air. And what eventually happens is that there are so many bullet holes in this plane that it seems that they have at some point where they're just kind of running on fumes. They're running on air because the fuel was shot out. So we have them just kind of flying, and so luckily Moses somehow goes on to be able to land the plane, but it's kind of landed right next to this cliff, and so we go on and we feel like every single little sneeze, fart, and chewing too loud moment is to go on and maybe push them further and further into this cliff. So we have Moses who is to get up from this chair as Keats is now in the back of the plane because like, well, hey, like if this plane is gonna crash, it's probably gonna crash like head of the plane first, so I'm gonna go back into the back of the plane. So Keats is already back there, so Moses is making his way back to Keats, and so Moses is telling Keats like, well, hey, uh, like don't go on and don't move, or this plane will move more. And so Keats is going on and telling him, it's like, well, hey man, like maybe you should whisper, because maybe the sound of what we're talking, the vibration, it's making the plane move. So they realize that that is actually a mistake, and they're just like, hey man, like let's just jump out of the plane. Luckily, by the time they jump out of the plane just rolls out, and the plane crashes. I'm kind of curious how they went on and did that effect, because I'm assuming that they might have gone on and just did like a toy plane. Just like, why would they crash like a legit plane? That just seems bizarre. But anyways, we have the two of them that are to go on and make their way to this hotel. And here's where we get to the kind of the funnier scenes. So we have the two of them making to this hotel. Keats goes on to, of course, call Captain Jensen to go on and kind of relay the fact of what had gone on and happened. All while it seems that Finch is to be kind of hearing what Captain Jensen is saying here. We have Keats, who is to go on and have suspicions that Finch is on the payroll of Colton, because we would, of course, have Moses. Oh, wait, let's back up here. We'd have Moses that goes on and states that there are some people in Colton's pocket and there's no one to really be trusted here. So we have Keats and Moses that go to this hotel, and we would, of course, have like this whole thing about like Charles asking, it's like, well, hey, are you two together? And Moses is just like, no. But the way, bizarrely, that Keats is kind of like leaned over, it's like, well, hey, don't, like, tell me that that doesn't look okay. So, uh, we have Moses that is talking to Charles or Charlie and trying to convince him here. It's like, well, hey, man, like that wife, like, she's looking pretty good. And Charles is like, yeah, like she's on a diet. And so Moses is like, well, hey, like, how about a sandwich between you, me, and her? Like, that sounds great, right? So convincing them to like spice up the love between the couple of them, just kind of bring in a third wheel. So, and eventually we'll find Charles, who is kind of convincing his wife to go on, like, yeah, maybe we should spice up the marriage. So, when Bledsoe kind of interrupts him, so Keats and Moses goes on to this room, and we would of course have Moses, who's talking about some adult movies that they can go on and watch. So we find that Moses is trying to go on and watch one of these adult films. And so we would, of course, have Keats, who is calling Tracy, and we would have Keats, who is talking to Tracy, and Tracy's like, yeah, like sounds like somebody having sex in the background. And Keats is like, no, like that's just Moses who's just watching this film. And so Keats is trying to tell Moses to shut it off. So we have Keats, who goes on and asks Tracy, like, well, hey, what are you wearing? That black thing that I got for you? And so we have Keats that notices that Moses is smoking weed, hangs with the phone, and we of course have like Moses who's smoking that fat joint, and Moses is wanting to give it to Keats, like, hey man, you want some weed? And Keats is like, sure, I'll take some weed, and then he immediately just douses it out. Because Moses, it seemed, hid that thing of weed in his butt crack for whatever goofy reason. So Keats is to eventually try and get some sleep, while Moses is to go on into the shower, and he, of course, belts out the Bodyguard song, and I will always love you, and this and that. And so Moses is belting this out so loudly that Keats is like, would you just shut up? Shut up! And then Keats ends up coming out of the shower and tells, like, Keats, you'll always be my bodyguard. Freaking hilarious. And so we have Keats, who is trying to go on and trying to get some sleep. So Moses is like, hey, like, maybe I can just kind of close this door and try to sneak out of this window and still have all this, like, soap all over me. So Moses is trying to get out of the window, and we all of a sudden see that Keats is like, aha, like, I caught you getting away, as Keats is to push his gun into Moses's butt. So Charles all of a sudden is just kind of walking by with his wheelbarrow, and all of a sudden sees the two of them in this window. And so we have Keats is to put the gun on Moses. And so Moses is like, well, hey, could you get that thing out of my butt? And Charles is overhearing this, like, what? And so Keats is telling Moses, like, well, hey, I want you on the bed right now. And so, or he wants him, like, in the bedroom right now, or whatever. So, like, whatever they're saying here just sounds hilarious. And so it gets to the point that just Keats is so annoyed with Moses that he eventually just ties him to this toilet, and is to go on and tell him, it's like, well, hey man, like, I'm sorry about the turds in there. I had a big breakfast. And like just walks off. So Moses is like trying to fall asleep tied to the turlet, and so he's kind of looking at like this hole, uh where of course the turds would be, and he's like looking, and he's like, oh. So Keats is sleeping, and so we have somebody coming in and trying to sneak in, because of course we've had Keats, who has gone on to now tell his captain as well as Tracy where of course they are. So somebody had to kind of give up some kind of information here. So we have Moses that is realizing like somebody is making their way in. So what Moses does is he tries to take his shoes and fling them, and like doesn't go on and has the ability to wake up Keats. So Moses tries to grab the remote control with his foot and try to turn the TV on, and immediately when the TV is to be turned on, like Keats is to drop from his bed, and he sees that like somebody had kind of broken in, and so Keats fires upon this guy's foot, and so we have both Keats and Moses who get the heck out of there. They're running off like crazy. So they end up going into this truck with Charles, who is to be running all over the place, or running all over the place, driving all over the place. And I'm like, oh my god, where are you going? And so he's like, hey man, like I know this place like the back of my hand. So they all go into this truck together, and we start to see all these cars just getting just dumped into these bits of water, or these kind of certain cliffs, and all of these things, as Charles is to explain what all significance that they hold. It's like, yeah, this place is good for fishing. This place is here, and like, and so they get rid of all these guys, and so Moses is like, man, like I'm gonna make out with Charles. Yeah. So we then have Charles that drops off both Keats and Moses by this phone booth, and so Keats is to go on and relay to his captain what all is going on. So eventually, what also ends up happening is Moses needs his phone call. Like, hey man, like, can you let me call my mom? Like, you know it's Tuesday, and she'll worry if I don't go on and I don't call her. So Moses goes on to call his mother, and his mother, of course, is high. And so Moses is like, oh, hey, Ma, you're high? Like, what else is new? So Moses is going on and talking, and so eventually, like, the phone gets pushed off to Keats, and so Keats is talking to Moses' mother, and it's like, well, yeah, like, he's my best friend too, Ma, and this and that. So we of course have Keats is like, yeah, I hate the fact that you made me do that. So we go on, and no, wait. Keats does not go on and relay to his captain. He ends up needing to call the FBI. That's what he does. So he calls the FBI, hoping that they won't be in Colton's pocket. So the very next day, the FBI arrives, and so we have Keats and Moses meet up with Gentry and Cole. So we have them go into this car, and we have Moses that goes on to be like, wait a minute, like, is your name like Derek Gentry or something like that? And so the guy's like, well, yeah, like that's my name. And so Moses is like, well, hey, Keats, how is it that I went on and I knew that this guy's whole name was to be what it is? Like, isn't that weird? Aren't you going to call me a psychic? Because the guy never stated what his name was. And so it's like, isn't there something up with that? So we come to find that, yeah, Moses is to know certain cops are dirty, and were paid off by Colton, and for Moses to remember all these names that he's kind of signed off away for all these kind of dirty deeds. So we have Keats who goes on and is to be talking to Cole in the back of the seat, and it's like, well, hey, like, you should probably figure out a way to shut your friend up here. And Keats is like, well, yeah, I'll go on and like, I'll show you how to do that. And so Keats goes on and headbutts Cole, and then fights with Gentry to try to get him out of this car. So Keats and Moses go on, and so they drive off here. So, and I'm hoping I'm covering quite a bit of this movie so far. I think there might have been a scene here or there. Like, I know there was one scene where we have, like, Colton, who is, like, right on this bench press, and he has a thing of alcohol, like, right next to him. And in my brain, I'm like, wait a minute! You have a guy who is doing a workout, but then he has alcohol right then and there. That makes no sense. So you're gonna tell me that this guy is gonna get drunk and pop out a few reps? No. That seems to be like the worst concoction of things to have together. That makes no rational sense in this film. Like, I would understand more if it was like a fruity, like, shake or something. But you're having this guy go on and do this workout, and even if it's after the workout, he's like pounding some scotch or whatever. That makes no sense in this film. Why? Why did they do that? But so Colton is talking to Bledsoe, and it's like, well, hey, yeah, like, the guy's got away, and so we have Colton, who is to kind of be simply talking under his breath, but you can obviously tell they calls him like a stupid idiot or something like that. And then when he when he gets back on the phone with Bledsoe, he's like, well, yeah, you're a stupid idiot anyway. So calls him the same thing, just does it in anger off to the side, but yeah, I get that, but still. Anyways, so Keats and Moses are to go on, and so Keats is to go to the people that he can trust, and so Keats turns in Moses to both Detective Solomon and Detective Jones, and once he does, Keats is to ask Moses, like, well, hey, like, do you think we can trust these guys? Like, do these names sound familiar? And Moses is like, no, I don't think those names sound all that familiar. So Keats is to go on and get arrested, and so Moses tells Keats, like, well, hey, man, like, make sure you call my mom every once in a while, and Keats is like, okay, I'll do that. So Keats goes on to get a phone call, and come to find out this phone call is from Tracy, but it's actually from Colton, who is like, well, hey, I got your girl, like, you give me what I want, I give you what I want kind of thing. Like, it's the whole normal rigmarole of whatever. So we have Moses that is to be in the cell, possibly getting pressed to the cell by a kind of bigger guy, where Moses is like, please don't go on and do this. Please don't go on and do what I think you're going to do here. So we have Keats that goes on and frees Moses, and we have the guys like, well, hey, man, what's going on? So Keats is freeing Moses, and Moses is like, well, yeah, like, I thought that you were going to help me out, because Moses was to go on and want to tell Keats that Moses has so much on Colton, like, so much information, that if Keats will give Moses a complete, like, immunity, and Keats is like, no, man, like, they're gonna send you away for like 10 years, like, it's fine. But so we also have Keats, who is to tell like Moses like one bit of truth that he was a state to Moses while they were undercover, and that Keats's dad was actually like a smackhead or a guy who was on drugs, and that they like found him with a needle or whatever. And Keats is to tell Moses like, well, yeah, like I never told anybody that before. And we also had Moses, who was to go on and ask Keats like, well, hey man, like, did you tell them about my God, what was it, the bris? Like, did you tell him about how like how I'm cut, man? Did you tell him my bar mitzvah? No. So so we push on. So Keats and Moses are to figure out where Colt's place or Colton's place is, and so they go through the back, and so Moses, I guess, had told Keats like, well, hey man, like nobody really is back here, and so when they both go in there, like there's a ton of people that are back there, and so because when they go to like the very beginning of this home, and Keats is kind of handing over Moses, and the guard that's in front of the place is to try and shoot Keats, but luckily Moses has a gun and he fires upon the guard, and then excuse me, they go to the back of the house, and that's when there's a ton of guys, so they have to like shoot through all these guys. So it eventually leads us to have both Keats and Moses like look their way through the house, and we have Keats and we have Moses, who goes on and finds Tracy. So it's like, okay, like we just got to get out of here now. So we come to find out that Tracy is to go on and tell Keats like, well, hey, I have a gun, and so Keats is like, good, hand it to me. And that's when we find out that Tracy is actually working for Colton, and she was the whole time. It's like, aha! So wool is pulled over under our eyes the whole entire time. And so Moses is like, man, like, doesn't it feel so bad to find out that, like, because Moses ended up finding out that Keats was like this undercover cop. Now, Keats is to figure out that this girl has been working with Colton for the whole entire time. So Tracy is to go on and be talking to Keats, and she's kind of hiding from him and stuff and like that. And so when Keats is to kind of go off and just kind of hide from Tracy, who has this gun, we have Tracy who see like kind of Colton up on high. So Tracy's like, okay, like, well, I'm gonna play this card now. So Tracy states is like, well, hey, Keats, like, you know what, like, I was to do all this, and like I really was to fall in love with you. And Moses is like, don't buy into that bullshit. No, she's lying to you, Keats. But so Keats goes on to meet up with Tracy by the stairs, because it seems that Tracy's wanting to kind of do a truce, and so Keats, it seems, is buying into it, but then he's blinded by love, because we have Moses, who realizes that Colton is kind of up on high. So Moses, at some point in this movie, tells Keats that he would have gone on and taken a bullet for him, and so Moses technically does here. Moses jumps to get shot, and so Keats goes on after Colton. So what ends up happening here is that we eventually have this fight up between both Colton and both Keats, and like it ends up with, like, I think Colton has this kind of like metal rod, and he goes on and like bats Keaton in the forehead at some point. And so We also had this funny moment where, oh yeah, way back in the film, speaking of the whole head thing, we had both Keats and Moses like, well, hey, like they were like walking back to the hotel, and Moses is like, well, hey, I gotta pee, and Keats is like, okay, you have like 15 seconds, and Moses is like, hey, Matt, like like shaking and everything, like it's gonna take time, and Keats is like, okay, now you have 10 seconds. So Moses goes on and like whips it out. And so, like, again, Moses is talking about, like, man, that's pretty cool what you did to me in the past. And so Keats is to go on to tell Moses that his time is up, dragging this chain. And so Moses falls over and he realizes that he has a bunch of urine all over himself. And so there's this whole thing where Moses is going on and talking to Keats, like, well, hey, man, like, let me pause here for a second. So he mentions how, like, Moses, he mentions how it's like, I'm going to get all the cows and the chickens and all the barn animals just pee on you. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to get every single animal just pee all over on you. So it's a whole weird, goofy bit about that. So, so back to that, and the whole reason why I went to that is because Keats goes on and is to like hit Moses on the head, and Moses is like, "Oh my god!" So Keats is like, "Well, yeah, like, you know why that hurts so much? Because I have a metal head or I have a metal plate in my head because of you." So, and he still has that like scar on his forehead. So So now we have James Caan, Colton, who's going on hitting Keats with this rod. And so eventually, how this all plays out is it seems that Colton is going to get the jump on Keats and almost kill him. And then Moses comes in with his gun and shoots uh, Colton in the head. So by the end of this, it all just kind of works out. And so Keats is to go on and tell Moses, well, hey, man, like, how about you go on and just kind of get out of here after all and head to Mexico to become that bullfighter. And so we come to, by the end of this, to find out that Moses, after all, is going to Mexico to become this bullfighter, and we have all these women that are talking to Moses and sitting. It's like, oh, I don't like the bullfighters because I don't like how they kill the bull. And Moses is like, oh, no, 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 like, I don't kill the bull. Like, if anything, I'm friendly to the bull. Like, and so on and so forth. So we have us find that all of these guys are to be fairly upset with Moses for stealing all of their women. And we come to find that Keats is to be there and to, of course, go on to now have this dog that is to kind of even things up. It's like, yeah. And all of a sudden, the dog falls over because he's far too drunk. And so they're like, oh. So we have our characters going on and getting into the fights and so on and so forth. And that's how we kind of just wrap up this movie. So with that said, I'm going to try and go on and get out of here. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything huge that I forgot about. I know that there is the one scene where, because I was trying to remember every bit of these little pieces of dialogue and whatever. And so we had the one scene where when both Keats and Moses were making their way out to the police station, we had like Captain Jensen was like, well, Keats, what are you doing? And we have Keats is like, well, hey, like, I have to go on and kind of I do this case. So we had all of a sudden Moses was like, oh my god, like, this guy's name is Jensen. And so Keaton realizes that like his own captain was on the payroll, and so Jensen goes on and like or Keats goes on and punches uh, his own captain out, and then they run off. And so it's like, man, I thought it was Finch the whole time. Is my captain? Wow. So we then go on and have them both at this strip club, and Moses is like, well, maybe it was actually Benson. And Keith's like, so what? I just punched out my own captain. He's like, well, yeah, but names can get confused. So yeah, so with that said, I think everything else is covered. Like I kind of, in a roundabout way, covered certain scenes randomly. But that's what kind of happens when I'm kind of thinking of all the smaller scenes of which that also or to be like, oh yeah, like I should probably bring this up too because they were kind of funny scenes or there was just something there. So to cover. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here because I know that this is an hour and 20 minutes and I'm already spoken for an hour about this film. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about Bulletproof if you checked it out. I think there is a sequel of this film, Bulletproof 2, but I don't know how it's connected to the original, so just seems very weird. Other than that, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.